Recovery in an Addictive World with Wilson Schaef. Wilson Schaef is an internationally known teacher, writer, philosopher, and psychotherapist who specializes in working with the addictive process in families, groups, organizations, and other systems. She's the author of several books, including Women's Reality, Escape from Intimacy, When Society Becomes an Addict, and, along with Diane Fassel, The Addictive Organization. Recovery in an Addictive World was recorded live at the 10th Annual Common Boundary Conference. On this live recording, Wilson Schaef presents her view that individual addictions must be understood in light of our entire culture as an addictive system. And now, Recovery in an Addictive World with Wilson Schaef.
First of all, it is my belief that we live in an addictive society. That the society in which we live not only supports addiction, but it demands addiction in order to be able to tolerate it. And that I have become aware in my own recovery and in working in the recovery field that we tend to limit our scope in terms of what we're doing. And I think that this is why people like Bennett, what they're trying to do doesn't work, because their scope is too narrow. We have the individual, we have the family, we have the organizational, the societal, and the global aspects of addiction. In early recovery, this is enough just to deal with the individual. Then the family begins to change. What happens, I think, is we're finding more and more of this, and Diane Fassel and I, the two of us who wrote the Addictive Organization, are finding that there's a line drawn here. And this line is drawn by individuals and, I think, by clinicians in the field. There's a belief that if we just deal with the individual and the family, everything's going to be all right. And this is much too small a scope. The other thing that has to do with this line is that I'm finding more and more people who are saying, I'm recovering. You know, I feel pretty good about myself and life is working, maybe for the first time. My family's getting better. But every time I go to work, I'm not sure I can maintain my sobriety in this crazy workplace. That is a threat to my sobriety. Now, I believe that it's not by accident that the Addictive Organization is here in the middle of this chart. Because I think that the Addictive Organization is like the infrastructure that's holding together the addicted individual and family and the addictive society and globe. And that unless we're willing to look at our organizational structures and community structures, we're not really going to deal with addiction. Some of the most addictive organizations I know, for example, are treatment centers. That even though they're trying to deal with addiction, the way they function is so addictive. And I really believe that's one of the reasons that addicts feel at home there when they first go in, is because they are. That the center itself is so addictive, and its functioning is so addictive. Now, unless we're willing to move on to understand the scope of addiction, I don't think there's any possibility for us to really deal with this problem. I think more and more individuals are going into recovery. There's no question about that. I even think at some point we may be approaching a critical mass. But it takes so much energy to deal with an addictive organization. And it takes so much time, money, and energy to deal with an addictive society. Unless we are willing to look at the global aspects of addiction and what that means, there's no real possibility, I think, of understanding the problem. And I think when you're in early personal recovery, this is too much. You don't need to deal with that. But those of us who are in the field and working in the field and who are theorizing and planning, I think need to move beyond just individual and family recovery. So that's one thing I want to say. Now the other thing is that I believe that we have systematically ignored what I think is the key, and that is the underlying addictive process. That what we have done is that we have treated or worked with one addiction or another as if it's in isolation. I know some old-time AA folks will say to me when I go to an AA meeting and I say, my name is Ann and I'm a relationship and romance addict, and they'll say, what's that shit, you know? And they'll say, well, we have the real addiction, you know? And I can agree with them that they do at that point if they're thinking that way. But what I think is important to see here is that we have, in this society, we have an underlying addictive process. And I think of it like an underground river. I don't know if any of you are from the Midwest. I used to live in the Midwest, and there were always underground rivers, and they always came up in your basement. And no matter what you do, if you dig inside, you could dig outside, you could waterproof around the whole house, the river never left your basement. I mean, you just spent a lot of money on people who are going to dry up your basement. Now, I think that's what the underlying addictive process is. The underlying addictive process is learned. That's what I believe. Now, that doesn't mean that all this work about genetic components and physiological components and et cetera, that that's wasted. I think the problem is that it's thought of in such a simplistic cause and effect way. What I think we have is that the choice of addiction may be genetically and physiologically determined, the choice of your favorite addiction. But the addictive process is something that we all are affected by. We have learned it. We have learned it most of all in our schools, our churches, our communities. We get it in our politics, our educational system. We get it from everywhere around us. If you don't know how to be an addict of some kind, you don't fit into this culture. Okay? Do some of you know what I'm talking about here? Okay. Some people say to me one time, some of these smart folks say to me, well, if everybody has it, then doesn't that make it meaningless? And I say, if everybody had AIDS, would that make AIDS meaningless? It's the same thing. It's the same thing. No, it makes it something that we need to break through the denial about. Right now, I believe where we are and understand this disease is we are on this denial scale right here. We have this denial line between the family and the organizational. And unfortunately, clinicians have reinforced this denial line. That as long as we say it's the individual, it's the family, it's all we need to deal with, and of course that's what we know how to deal with as clinicians, then we are supporting the denial system of the society. Now, if we went past this line, we would have to break through the denial system of the society. Because if we go past this line, we're saying, oh, we've got to look at organizations. We've got to look at society. We've got to look at the globe in terms of addiction and the effect of addiction. Okay? What usually happens with addictions is we face off with our favorite addiction that's killing us the fastest. Usually. Frequently, it's a chemical addiction or an ingestive addiction. Then, our addiction just finds another channel. I have never met anyone with only one addiction. And I hope you haven't. Because what I know is if you have, they're stuck in their recovery. Then another channel will form. Then another channel. So we have all kinds of addictions that we need to deal with. Now, there are two main kinds of addictions from the way I see it. There are the ingestive addictions, and these include what we take into the body, whatever form we take into the body. The ingestive addictions are drugs, alcohol, prescription drugs, nicotine, caffeine, salt, sugar, food, inhalants, chocolate. I always mention it in its own category because it's such a good combination of sugar and caffeine. You know. Now, any addiction does the same kind of thing. An addiction is something over which we become powerless, that interferes with our normal life process. But addiction does more than that. An addiction is anything that we're tempted to lie about. Think about it. An addiction also alters our consciousness and affects our thinking process. It keeps us out of touch with our internal information system. Where is it you know when someone is lying to you? Is it in your head? It's your gut, isn't it? Addiction shut that off. That doesn't get up. In addition, addiction shut off our informational system that connects us with our spirituality and our own internal process of life. So we have altered consciousness, altered thinking. Now, the process addictions are just as effective at doing that as the ingestive addictions. Process addictions are relationship addiction, romance addiction, sex addiction, work addiction, money, gambling, debting, spending, a lot of money process addictions. Thinking addiction. This is one I've just about decided to write about because I think people don't really understand thinking addiction and what it is. Most of us are trained into thinking addiction in college. We call it academic dualism. And one that I'm always a little hesitant to mention, but which I think is very, very important, is religion addiction. Now, these are process addictions. In the process addictions, you become addicted to the process. The content loses its meaning. For example, with a good workaholic, the good workaholic doesn't care after a while about production or creativity. The workaholic just can't stop working. And so what you're doing doesn't matter. And whether it has any relevance to you doesn't matter, or whether it has any relevance to your job doesn't matter. But you can't stop working. Same thing with all the other process addictions. I believe all addictions are an escape from intimacy. All addictions keep us from being intimate with ourselves, and they totally annihilate the possibility of being intimate with anyone else. Now, this is really tricky in the pseudo-relationship addictions, relationship, romance, and sex. Because what happens in those addictions is that we think we are trying to get intimate. And we use our sexual addiction or our romance addiction or our relationship addiction to try to get intimate. We think. But the very way we go about approaching intimacy is an escape from intimacy. I see a lot of little blank faces here. Do you get what I'm saying here? Furman and I went out last night to have dinner. We went out to go to a movie. We just simply cannot get into this movie, this wolves, walks with wolves. Dance, whatever it is. We can't get in it. I mean, we were there an hour and 15 minutes early last night, and they were sold out. So when in doubt, go eat. And we were in this restaurant where, your neighbor is almost on top of you. I mean, tables that are this far apart. And so, I don't know, there's something about that. I'm from the West. That's not quite enough space for me. But we were sitting there, and we were almost finished, and this couple came in and sat down beside us. And neither of us even looked at them. And I said, "Can you feel that?" And he said, "Yeah, I was just about to say something." And what it was courting behavior. And I said, I feel so sad, because both of them, I would put money on this, both of them think they're trying to connect. And what they're doing is escaping from intimacy. Because their courting behavior doesn't allow them to really find each other. It's a smokescreen. Now, these are the process addictions. My experience is, personally and professionally, that a relationship addiction, first of all, is just as deadly as alcoholism or drug addiction. In fact, we are finding that a good relationship addict who lives with a non-recovering chemical addict tends to die younger than the chemical addict. Did you know that? We're talking about a deadly disease here, progressive deadly disease. And of course your being dies much before your body does. Another source that I have for this is, and this is before I even got in the addiction field, but I don't know how many of you are familiar with Norm Shealy and his work. He was the founding president of the Holistic Medical Association. His work is in pain and health control. I don't exactly like the term control, but we'll take it. Anyway, what he told me years ago is people come to his clinic when they are in the final stages of disease or pain, when they have had 12 back operations and cannot continue to function, when they are in final stages of cancer, et cetera, et cetera. And this was maybe 15 years ago. We were talking about this. And he said, Ann, he said, of all the people who come to me, about 80% of them we can help. They make a shift, and they really do better. Some of them get well. And he said, of that 80%, it's interesting that 80%, he said, of that 80%, about 80% of them, I would say that their disease is not physical, that it has physical manifestations, but I would say that their disease is spiritual, psychological. And he said, of that group, and this is the clincher, most of them, how do you put it? Because he did it in cause and effect, and I wouldn't do that now. But what he said was, most of them, their disease is caused by a sick relationship, a sick primary relationship. And he gave me an example, which was really impressive to me. He said there was a woman who came to their clinic, and she was considered to be in the latter stages of cancer. And she had come for pain control. And I believe at that point their program was like a 12-day program. It was short. He said on about a day 10 or 11, she came to him and she said, Dr. Shealy, my cancer's gone. I don't need it. And he said, okay, whatever you say, And she said, I'm serious. I don't need, I'm fine. I'll finish the program, but I'm fine. I know I'm fine. And she went home and announced this to her family. I thought the reaction was really interesting, because what her family said was, you're in denial. You're in the final stages of cancer. You're going to die. You really need to face it. She said, I'll prove it to you. So she went to the hospital, got checked out. her tumor was gone. Well, what happened, and I think this is quite extraordinary, within 2 weeks, her husband committed suicide. Someone had to go in that relationship. And when she decided not to, he did. Now, the other interesting thing was that a couple of years later, when her dog died, she had a re-emergence of the cancer. And then was able to I think it was able to be under control. But this relationship stuff is real deadly and real tricky. And I think that we underestimate it all the time. Just let me, well, go ahead.
Explain thinking addiction.
How come you aren't all laughing? Would you explain thinking addiction? That's a good joke. You don't get it?
I don't know anything about it.
I know, but that just is a good joke. I'm sorry you don't get it. Thinking addiction. There are types of thinking addiction. Ruminative, obsessive, circular kind of thinking. That's one type. Another kind of thinking addiction is logical, rational, linear thinking. Another kind of thinking addiction is dualistic thinking, where you set things up as either this or that, this or that. See, we're trained in that kind of thinking.
Is there any thinking that isn't addictive?
Oh, absolutely. And I think what Berman would say, Morris Berman, who's here, would say any disembodied thinking, I think, runs a risk of being thinking addiction. Any thinking that is not also tuned into awareness, presence, intuition. I was recently in a think tank with a bunch of psychiatrists and a world-renowned physicist. And I left early because I have not been in a group that was as unclear in many years as this group. There was only one other recovering person in the group. We spent, and this is just giving an example, we spent 20 minutes trying to decide whether we would discuss. Actually, we spent 20 minutes discussing whether we would discuss the difference between attachment and addiction. Now, do you get it? They never got out of these little brains of theirs. Never, ever. At one point, I was so frustrated with the group, I was sitting just quietly weeping. I mean, I'm a good howler, but I knew not to howl in that group. But I just sat with just tears rolling down my cheeks with my hands folded in my lap out of the frustration because I had tried to see if I could make any impact on it. We might move to another level. The next day, one of the psychiatrists, who's on the National Board of Psychiatric Examiners, told me that he was really scared to death because he thought I was having a psychotic break. And they had made no provisions for that to happen there. Now, I felt that I was in the midst of thinking addiction. And one of the things that kept happening, one of the places where we kept rubbing each other, not friendly rubbing, I must say, was with projection and interpretation. I would say, I am frustrated out of my gourd with what's going on right now. And they would say, well, you are only, and they would start interpreting me. And I would say, don't interpret me, I just told you. I just told you where I am. Well, that means that you, and they'd start again. And it was all projection. All projection. That's thinking addiction. But there are other kinds of thinking addiction. Like one of the things I discovered very early on when I first got into this field was that, well, let me just, I did my internship for my doctoral work at Bellevue Hospital in New York. And when I was at Bellevue was like the capital of schizophrenia of the world. And we could diagnose schizophrenia in anybody. I mean, it was just, and we had categories which just confounded the mind. I mean, we had pseudo-neurotic schizophrenics, pseudo-psychopathic schizophrenics, ambulatory schizophrenics, schizophrenic remission. I mean, we had everything. My favorite category was pseudo-normal schizophrenic. So I learned a lot about schizophrenic thinking patterns. When I first started working with addictions, I had this deja vu. And I said, this is fascinating, because when somebody is really in their addictive disease, it's the same. It's the same as schizophrenic thinking. I think they're on the same continuum. And I was just fascinated. Well, of course, I've since learned that when the term schizophrenia was first coined, it included alcoholism. Did y'all know that historically? It was like an umbrella term to gather in a large bunch of different discrepant kind of phenomena and try to get them so we could medicate them, basically. So that's thinking addiction. It is rampant in the society, just rampant, and we are trained into it, and that's a process, addiction. Yes?
Can you describe non-addictive thinking?
Well, let me give you an example. I'm better at examples. I was doing a workshop in Chicago this week, and I occasionally step on people's toes, especially therapists. And there was one woman who, in the back, who clearly, I started to say disliked me. I think that's very mild. And I think she hated me. Mm-hmm. But she knew better than to say, I just hate you and what you're saying. You know, I would have felt fine with that. That would have been real honest to me. What she did was she took something I said and she tried to twist it in a way that would trap me into having either to refute what I had said or to agree with her. Now, there are a couple of ways to respond to something like that. What I knew, I call this the cesspool question. The cesspool question, because it looks like a question. And what I used to do when I was younger and more naive, I would step forward to try to answer it, and I would find that it looked like solid ground, but suddenly I would be covered 3 feet over in shit and never know what hit me, you know. So when I hear a question like now, I step back, and I didn't know which level to deal with her on, because my gut was saying, this is dangerous. There's something dangerous here. And my head said, well, I could answer that question, but that's not going to do it. You know? And so my tendency is to respond to the gut, because my thinking is informed by my information system. And my information system was telling me, this is dangerous ground here, and let's see if we can find out what's really going on. Which we couldn't. She left. Because when you respond to that kind of trap from the gut, the trap doesn't work. But we could have debated that issue endlessly. I don't even remember what it was now, the content of it, and I wasn't going to get into that. Yes?
Excuse me, how did you respond?
Pretty much, I said, this doesn't feel good to me. I said, my feeling is an invitation to a fight. And I don't want to fight with you, so let's see if we can reframe the question. Or.
So you're saying there's a difference between the cerebral thinking and the full consciousness thinking, or?
I think there's a difference between, what euphemistically has been called left brain thinking. And thinking that doesn't doesn't utilize the whole brain and the body. Now, this is one of the problems that I believe we have with psychotherapy, as talking psychotherapy, if you will, or even non-talking psychotherapy, some of it, is because we tend to lead with our brain. And we try to figure things out. And we believe if we figure things out, we're going to be okay. So that if I know I'm from an alcoholic family, and I know the dynamics of an adult child of an alcoholic, and I know this, and I know that, at some level the belief is that we'll be all right. That insight, intellectual insight, will be okay. Now, I have never seen anyone heal from an intellectual insight. I have never seen that happen. I think that it's sort of, the analogy I use is like trying to have a baby by masturbation. That it can be interesting, it can be fun, it can involve your time, but you don't get a baby. And we have people who come to work with us who know all about their family dynamics, their personal dynamics, everybody else's dynamics, everything, and they're just crazy as can be. And I believe that's not where you heal. That you heal inside of you and your being, and then you need to bring it back out through your thinking, logical mind. You need to give it information. You need to give it concepts. You need to give it language. But if you try to get there that way, it won't work. So it's not just the content, it's the process of how we go about it. Okay, wait, this one was first.
I'm trying to understand a pretty complete definition of what an addiction is that would cover the different examples that you've given.
I'm not good at definitions. I'm good at descriptions and examples. But there's something about definitions that, to me, are part of the addictive thinking process. And so I'll give you an example of that. I was a keynote speaker at the first annual conference on codependence. And those of us who are the experts, that's such a seductive term to me. We're inviting the experts a day early. I said, oh, must be me. Anyway, I went. And I went because I thought we're gonna talk and exchange, and this is going to be so exciting. What are you learning about this, and what am I learning? And I went with the agenda to throw out the term codependence. That was what I wanted to put forward. And we spent the entire day trying to come up with a definition. It was one of the most boring days of my entire life. And I could not remember what we had come up with when we walked out of the room, because we were trying to get a definition that would make psychiatry happy. We were trying to get a definition that would make the DSM-4, that could possibly go in the DSM-4. We were trying to get a definition that recovering people would feel okay with, and one that was broad enough to include everything they thought was included in codependence, but narrow enough that it would be diagnostically useful. And it was meaningless. It was just meaningless. And yet we could have spent the day describing and talking about what we were learning as we work with this disease process, and I think we could have had a very rich time of it. Let me tell you about another experience that I had. I was speaking at the Brookridge Institute, do you know? And I was on a panel with this lovely man that I laugh because we really like each other, and we have absolutely no ability to communicate on God's earth. It's just, he's absolutely terrified of me, and I don't know where he's come from, and we just have a wonderful time with each other. And we were both ends of the panel. Linda Leonard, God rest her soul, was in the middle. She didn't say a word. And I forget, there's someone else. But he said, okay, his opening gambit was, can you give me, he's a scientist, can you give me an operational definition of addiction? And I thought, boy, this looks like an ace from where I, play tennis. From where I'm sitting, I don't know whether I can return this ball or not, but I'm sure as hell going to try, And so I sat there, and I thought, now, invitation to the dance, you see. This is an invitation into a thinking addiction. And I thought, can I deal with this? I mean, it was really a good challenge for me. And I looked around the group. There were a lot of recovering people there. And I said, an addiction is something that an addict knows they have. I tell you, it's one of the happiest days of my life. I'd forgotten about that. Thank you for reminding me of that. And that was the only thing I was comfortable with. Yes?
Does this have something to do with stereotypical masculine thinking versus feminine stereotypical?
She's asking if it has something to do with stereotyped masculine, feminine thinking. Well, I like the word that you used, stereotype. And I am just to a point where I can't stand the term masculine and feminine. First of all, it's a dualism. And what I know is that masculine and feminine is not a dualism. That whenever we set it up as a dualism, we're in trouble. Secondly, and this is where Jung and Jungians and I part ways, is that to term strong, assertive, masculine, I think perpetuates the problem. I find it, frankly, to be more typical of white thinking and of the white race than I do and I have a lot more comfort in splitting it in terms of the world view that the white race has developed than I do with masculine and feminine. Now, if you can say that because, I can come in around the back door here and support what you say, because certainly that's what my first book, Women's Reality, is about. If you want to say that women are more disenfranchised in the white culture, even if we're white, and that we may have maintained more connection with a root, I think there may be something to that. And some of the most white male system people I've ever met are white women. We learn the system well. Or black women who really are making it in the system. I just was at a conference of Native American Indian folk, and it was, one man told me that it's so interesting. Remember back in the Civil Rights Movement, and there was a thing called Oreo, if you were black on the outside and white on the inside? And they said, well, we call American Indians apples. They're red on the outside and white on the inside. I thought that was great. But it was interesting to see, because this is a group that's dealing with science and engineering and trying to hold on and deal with their native culture and make it in the paying jobs, which they see as science and engineering in white culture. Let me back up now to where I was, and let's just tie that up. So that this underlying addictive process will switch channels. And until I think we recognize that in the way we're working with the disease, and we recognize the community and societal aspects of it, we're really not going to understand what we're dealing with. We're just going to put on Band-Aids. We're going to hold the cover on the pot. I think that's what Bennett was doing. He's sitting on a hot stove with pots boiling over all around him, and he's just trying to keep the lids on. But he's not looking at what's fueling the stove. And I think that's one of the things we have to deal with. So, until we recognize that, we're really not going to get a handle on this and this whole recovery thing. Now, there's another thing that I want to say about that we switch channels with our addictions. But those of us who work in the field, I think, over a period of time, with people over a period of time, and this is one of the things that occasionally I do some, how can I say it, self-reflection, shall we call it. And after I went to that first CODA conference, I thought, why am I in such a different place than all these other people? You know, we're working in the same field. What is it that my perceptions are so different, you know? And I could come up with easy male, female, non-psychiatric. I mean, I knew that wasn't it. And what I realized was that my perceptions come from two places that I think are really important. One is that I am participatory, that I am myself a recovering person. And so I participate in an ongoing way in what I'm talking about. And so I have my own experience to reflect from and through and to. Now, what I also know is that I was trained in my schooling to be a non-participatory person, that I was trained to be objective, that I was trained to stand outside and look at and evaluate. Now that is very key for me because my training was good and I was good at it. You know, I was a tester, I was an evaluator, I was a diagnostician, I was, you know, other than my seminary training. And even that, I was trained to stand outside and analyze in theology. Not spirituality, but theology. So, what has been very positive to me is that as I was forced into my own recovery, and my specialty is relationship and romance addiction, and as I was forced into my own recovery by my life, and as I did my recovery, I had to make a paradigm shift in order to continue doing my recovery. That I had to be participatory, that I could not go to meetings and watch what other people were doing and try to figure it out, and then see if I could do it. That I had to participate over time. The other thing that I realized was that the way I have set up the work that I do with people, I long ago quit being a psychotherapist. In fact, I usually ask to be introduced as a recovering psychotherapist because I feel like my recovery from being a psychotherapist is much more difficult than my recovery with my relationship. And of course my relationship addiction is tied right in there. And romance addiction too. But I was trained into addiction is what I believe in psychotherapy. So that the way I have set up the way I work is that most people who work with addicts see them for 30 days. And then they see another group for 30 days. And then they see another group for 30 days. And that's the way most of the programs go and the people who are writing in this field right now. Well, with the work I do a year-long training group. And I see those people 3 times during that year. And then sometimes at intensives in between. They stay where they live, they work where they live, they go to meetings where they live. Neither I nor the group is key to their recovery or the place, and I think that's significant. And there's no control mechanism. We don't have rules about how they're supposed to behave and what they do and whether they can drink or not, or and what they do is they just continue to explore whatever it is that's going on with them. And that the people who work with me frequently do another year and sometimes even a third year because a lot of them do it as a treatment alternative and they figure that they could do 5 to 8 years and it still would be cheaper than going to treatment for 30 days. And then after they finish those intensive years that they do, they usually check back in, they keep part of the network, they go to intensives. I see them over periods 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And so what I have is a perspective of recovery that I think we only see in 12-step groups. But most people don't write about what goes on in 12-step groups. And most people write about the very early stages of recovery and the disease and they don't have a process perspective of what that is. And in the early stages of recovery in the disease, you're usually dealing with only one facet of the disease. Does that make any sense? See, it was very comforting for me to see this. Now, there's another piece that I want to put in here about recovery and what we're dealing with on a kind of global level. And I want to start with what an old Aboriginal elder from Australia said to me. He said, Anne, you know, hundreds of years ago, the white race made the decision to go the route of science and technology. And it's going to destroy the planet. And we've been waiting for you to realize that. And we hope that you understand it before it's too late. Now, one of the things, yesterday I noticed that I got a little defensive at one point about this 12-step program because I'm always getting flack about that. And I thought about that, because when I'm defensive, I know I'm always in trouble. And I realized later that it's not the 12-step program as recovery from a specific addiction that I'm so wedded to. But it's what I see happen as people work a 12-step program. And what I see happen is I see people make a paradigm shift. That they begin to think out of a new or a different or an old, very old paradigm. And that program, when we work it, is a tool that works. And it especially works with Western people.
This concludes Side A. Please turn the tape over for Side B.
Now, when Thich Nhat Hanh says, be mindful, I don't think Westerners really understand what that's about, frankly. And I think we have tried to absorb Buddhism, and we have tried to absorb Native American work, and we have tried to absorb this and absorb that. But we're white, And when we think mindfulness, I think at some level we got to think, And we've got to think control. Now, in my language, what he's talking about is noticing. And to me, this is one of the major skills of living in process, is just noticing. Noticing when you're tired. Noticing when you need to go to the bathroom. Noticing when you're not present. Noticing when you are present. I think what our Western mind does with this is we link control onto it immediately, but that's not living in process, as I understand it. And that's not what a lot of the Native people around the world talk about when they talk about, when the Aboriginals, for example, call it dream time. And dream time is just living your process, very simply. Just living your process and trusting out of that. Now, what we need to look at as we're looking at addiction and we're looking at recovery and we're looking at spirituality and we're looking at what all this means in terms of healing with ourselves and the planet, what we need to look at, I think, is the assumptions out of which we're coming that have gone unnamed. And for me, this is always necessary in everything I do, because the more I can know about my unnamed assumptions, the more I can be free of them. But if I don't name them, then they own me. Now, yesterday I spent quite a bit of time, and I'll try to do it quickly today, talking about how The society in which we live is an illusionary society. That it is a society that's based on the illusion of control. The firm belief that it is possible to control things. We think we can control Russia. We think we can control Hussein. We think we can control the weather. I'll never forget. I think this was before I wrote Women's Reality. This was probably 15 years ago. When I was listening to public radio and there was a news bulletin. I love this. And it was a news bulletin from Washington. And there were a group of scientists who said that if they just had a few billion more dollars for research, that they could, which I thought was interesting, I don't remember the figure, but that they could control the weather. Now, my immediate response was, why would anybody want to do that? You know, why would anybody want to do that? Have you ever been in one of those weather-controlled rooms? I had a wealthy friend who let me use her house in Aspen one time and had one of those rooms, and it's like being in this hotel.
What's the weather control?
Well, you go in and you punch rain, or you punch sunshine, or you punch mist, or you punch dry desert, and then you sit in the room. And it's about, I mean, it's not as big as this room, but it's like this room. There's no windows, no air, no nothing, you know, everything is punched. Well, anyway, I think why would anybody want to do that is a real important question. And what came to me next was, if we took that same amount of money, we could feed the hungry, we could do all kinds of other things, and we could learn something about living with the weather. And the mentality, the difference between the mentality of controlling the weather and living with the weather, I think is very key here. Because the mentality of controlling the weather is addictive thinking. Any system, any of you who is in recovery knows this, that whenever you get into your illusion of control, you've slipped into your disease. I know what I was going to say before and I didn't say it too. That is that any of you who is in recovery knows what Stevenson was writing about when he wrote Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That he was writing about his own alcoholism, and that the potion he took was alcohol to do that switch. But what I know is that with myself and anybody else I know who's in recovery, you can see when that person flips in to the disease process, the addictive process. And what I know is their faces change. Their bodies change. Now, I want to give you an example of this. There were three of us who lived together. There's a nun and John and myself. And one year I took John to Germany with me. This man's from Germany, knows friends of mine in Germany. Well, John got this crush on Rosa. You may have heard about. John is a relationship addict, among other things. And this man who's a good facilitator, fairly clear, a good friend, member of my family, suddenly became a human being that I had never seen before, that resembled a puppy dog. I mean, he was just... And I said, ugh, what? Who is this person? I finally said, we were sharing an apartment. I said, would you please go stay somewhere else? Oh, I can't stand to be around you. He said, I know I'm in my disease. And I love the way when people say, I know I'm in my disease, they stay that way, And anyway, so the following year, some of the German trainees came over, the European trainees came over, and they were going to stay with us. And so John came over and he said, I am not going to do that again. He said, I was really crazy. I'm not going to do that again. I'm working my program. I've got a sponsor to work. I'm going to control this. It's really what he got into. So, and he didn't get into that. But I was sitting at our kitchen table doing something. That's where we throw everything and covered with junk, the kind of space that is, where you sit and have a cup of tea or whatever. And I was sitting there, and I didn't even see him come up the stairs, but I heard him, and he walked behind me. And I went, ugh! And I said, ooh, you're in your disease. And he said, what? And I said, ugh, you're in your disease. And I got up and I went into the bathroom, and he followed me in, he said, and I love this, he's so sincere, he has a sincerity con. And he said, tell me how. Well, now, 2 weeks before that, I would have done it. That's my disease. I would have tried to tell him. And I looked at him and I said, it's your disease. Get yourself to a meeting. You figure out how you're in your disease. Well, he trusts me. And he knows if I went like this, that there must have been something that hit my back. Well, he went to a meeting and he came home and he says, you're right. He said, I'm not doing what I did in Germany, but what I'm doing is that I am going to make sure these people have a good time. And he said, I have not said no to them once. Everything, he said, I'm run ragged. They're asking me to run errands, drive them here, drive them there, get this information, answer the phone for them, make phone calls. He said, I've not said no once. And I'm going, I'm in my disease because I'm taking care of them. Now, what I know is that I felt that. I tend to be fairly tuned in. I felt it. What I know is, and any of you who's in recovery, in early recovery, it's real hard to discriminate between yourself, or your living process, as I would call it, and your disease. But as recovery progresses, you begin to be able to differentiate when you're acting out of your disease and when you're acting out of what I call your living process. Now, your face changes. Your body changes. Your energy changes. I find with the people who train with me and work with me, they can walk in a room and I can look at them and say, having a bad day? In your disease? Better do something. Now, I don't know what this is. I really don't know what this is. But I haven't heard a lot written about this either, or statistics on it all. But what I know is there's a flip. There's a flip when someone is operating out of this addictive disease process and when they're in their living process. And anybody who has worked very long on their own recovery and in the field can see this in themselves and other people. One of the reasons I left this think tank is because my experience was nobody there ever flipped. They were all in their disease. They had no idea that it was that there was non-disease. They thought they were normal. And I saw no hope that there was going to be any kind of shifting. And I knew that was a waste of my time to stay there. So I think this is real important. And there's been very little, if any, writing on this that I've ever seen about this kind of really split personality. Really split. Okay, back to what I was talking about earlier. Are you following me? Good. It's like following a Super Bowl, isn't it? One woman at lunch said, she was at the workshop yesterday, and we were talking about how sometimes when I meet people and I'm really excited to talk to them, I come, hi, and then they go, and she said, well, I think maybe you should think about that you're a high energy person, and some people have trouble with that. And I said, well, that's kind of normal for me. Yesterday I felt kind of subdued, actually. But she didn't say that. Anyway, okay, back to where we were. What we are looking at here, I believe, we're talking about a system that is an illusionary system. So we're back to the illusion of control. Whenever anybody or any system thinks it can control anything, It's an addictive system by definition. Okay? What about the serenity prayer?
Courage to change the things I can, but that change implies a kind of control.
Well, yeah, but it says, the first part I think is what's important.
Yeah. Well, I think that's...
Yeah. Serenity to accept the things I cannot change. The courage to change the things I can. One of the things that I can change is myself, but not by control. And if I am trying to change myself, I'm not going to. See, one of the things that I heard recently, which just really got me good, was I'm always arguing about calling the 12-step groups self-help groups. I don't believe they are self-help groups, and I think that anybody who's really active in them knows that they're not self-help groups. And so I'm always arguing with reporters when they want to interview me about self-help groups. And someone said to me recently that the 12-step program, the difference between psychology or self-help groups and the 12-step groups is that psychology and self-help groups are a program of improvement, and that the 12-step groups are a program of surrender. And I think that's real important. And I think that's part of, that's the control thing. Step one is that self-help groups are programs, or psychology are programs of self-improvement, and that the 12-step groups are a program of surrender. To me, that's very, very important. Now, step one, for me, as I understand, I was pre-step one for 2 years. I'm a very stubborn person, and I am a very honest person, and I was not going to do step one until I could do step one, and I couldn't do it for 2 years. And I just kept talking to my sponsor and reading it over and wrestling with it. And one of the reasons was because I'm a feminist. And what I saw was I am powerless. And every time I would read that, I would see red. And I would say, never! And so I didn't even see that there was another part to step one. I just, and then I would say, okay, I'll work on a little more, give me a little more time, and then I'd go back and I am powerless. So, and I trusted that response in myself.
Why do you keep going back?
Well, because I'm stubborn as hell. That's part of my disease. And I could see that it was working for other people. I liked what I saw. And so, and I'm conscientious, in a weird sort of way. And so I just kept hanging in with my resistance, And finally what I saw was, I'm powerless over my disease. I thought, it doesn't say anything about being powerless as a human being, because I knew I wasn't. It said something about being powerless over my addiction. Well, of course I'm powerless over my addiction, because that's what an addiction is something I'm powerless over. So that was easy for me. And then I spent another 6 months on the second part. My life has become unmanageable. No relationship addict, codependent has a life that's unmanageable. It's just that we haven't figured out how to manage it right yet. So it took me a while to get through step one. And then step two, I was really hung on that for a while. I could get the first part of step two. I believe a power greater than myself can restore me. But I'm not insane. I'm just a little crazy at times, but I am not insane, so therefore it took me a long time to get with that one. Step three was easy compared to step one and two. Anyway, back to control, because I believe step one is really the control step. That it deals with our illusion of control. And whenever we are in our illusion of control, we're an addictive system, an illusionary system. We also have an illusion of perfectionism. I call that the girdle syndrome. Perfectionism is defining what we should be like if we were the way we should be, and then trying to girdle ourselves into it. The girdle is almost always several sizes too small, and we believe if we just wiggle enough, we can be what our parents, the church, the society, our friends, our children, our spouses, ourselves think we should be. It may or may not have anything to do with who we are. Then there's the illusion of objectivity. And this is key, and this is the gift that Morris Berman gave me. That our scientific worldview says that it's possible to be objective. And to be objective, that means that you remove yourself from what David Bohm would call the hollow movement. You remove yourself from all things, all existence, the oneness. And you take yourself out and you make yourself object to be observed and manipulated, and you make everything else objects to be observed and manipulated. And that includes other people, the planet, animals, nature, the universe, and God. If you want to use that term, I would call it the living process. So you remove yourself from all of this. Now, I think that that's one of the reasons we need addictions. Because when we remove ourselves, we have to shut off our awareness. And that's what addictions do, of that oneness. And that's what this scientific method says to us is the ultimate in the search for truth. The ultimate in the search for truth is removing yourself from the oneness and looking at it and dissecting it and picking it apart. Then we have dishonesty. Everybody knows addicts are dishonest. Addictive process is dishonest. You're dishonest with yourself and everybody else. We have confusion, which is normal for the addictive process. And we have crazy thinking. So what we have been taught is that the system in which we live is reality. And that our reality is illusion. When the reality is the system in which we live is an illusionary system built on all these systems, and our own reality is all we have. But whenever we put forth our reality, like with this think tank group, we get told we're crazy. You know, and Virginia Institute used to say, sick, bad, crazy, stupid. And one of my friends here in Baltimore, some of you may know her, Carol Pearson, she wrote The Hero Within. She used to add fat, sinful, ugly, and incompetent. So whenever you put forth your own reality, there's something wrong with you. So one of the reasons we need our addictions is to shut off our awareness, and I think of the pain of that. And to try to make ourselves fit into an illusionary world. One that's built on illusion. Now, when I first went to spend time with the Aboriginal elders, I had heard about dream time, but I had no idea what that meant. I thought I might have a clue. I thought it meant dreaming or something, you know. But as I listened to them, this was another place where I just sat and wept. And you know, not one of them thought I was having a psychotic break. They just went on talking while I sat and wept. And as I listened to them, I thought, my word, what they're talking about when they talk about dream time, and it's only the dream time that's real, they're talking about what I mean as the living process system. And when they're talking about this unreal world, they're not talking about the way we talk about it in Christianity or religion, you know, like they're talking about this illusionary addictive system. So what has become clear to me over time is that we have to look at and leave, I think, the scientific method on which this system is based. That this scientific method is not only out of date, but as Berman says, actually he doesn't use these terms, but it has reached its entropic state. It's at a point where it is devouring itself. It's turning on itself and devouring itself. Now, this scientific method is a methodology that says that we can understand the world through reductionism, for example. That if we just take everything apart and reduce it to its smallest parts, that we will then know. That this is how knowing takes place. This method says that everything in existence operates on mechanistic principles. That people are ultimately a machine. That the universe is ultimately a machine. That, and this is one of the analogies that's often used, is that at some point something wound up a clock, and that the universe is a clock that just ticks away. But it's based on mechanistic thinking. Now, what I have found is that there is nobody more fundamentalist than a scientific zealot. That scientific zealots would make Southern Baptists look liberal in comparison. And that there is such an unbelievable belief that the only way to truth is through this scientific method, that it permeates everything we do. Now, one of the reasons that I believe that psychotherapy has to change completely, if it exists at all, it's a great thing to say at this conference, isn't it? Is that it is based on a mechanistic, reductionistic, scientific method. That no matter how you set it up, that and I don't care where you're coming from on this. I don't care whether you're talking about Freudian or whether you're talking about Gestalt or whether you're talking about some of the new meditation therapies. I don't care, because what I see is the same kind of thing. That it is set up on the model of the scientific experiment. And that model is that you have to reduce things to their lowest elements in order to understand them. So we analyze and we look for dynamics and we talk, and the whole thing I said earlier about trying to understand. That the person who is best or the most helpful is the person who is the most removed. God forbid dualistic relationships, right? Or human relationships. Some of the stuff about dual relationships just kills me. In Minnesota, they are really getting rabid about dualistic relationships. And that means that if I am seeing a client, I have to terminate them if our kids go to the same school. Or I have to terminate them if we go to the same church. Or if one woman I know got called in by the Psychological Board of Examiners because she took a guitar class with a former client. Talk about legalism, control, artificiality. Well, and imagine what that means in a farm community. New York City maybe, but in a farm community there's only one therapist and there's one school, and a couple of churches. I mean, it is so unbelievable.
Doing that rather than an agency imposing it on its workers?
Oh, the state. The American Psychological Association is doing it. I get investigated. I consider it an honor. It only cost me $10,000 to prove I didn't do something with it. And it was very helpful for me. At the time, I didn't realize it. But years ago, I had realized that I should drop my membership in APA. And I didn't. Mostly out of laziness. I had my malpractice insurance through there, and et cetera, and I didn't do it. But my intuition was, I don't agree with these guys anymore, you know? And what I know is when I'm living in process, that if I don't pay attention when I know something, then I get another opportunity to do it, but it usually costs more, you know? And I figure the cost is the tuition that I pay for the opportunity for this learning. But what happened, because I was being investigated to me like, you know, by the king, I got to study the ethics. And what I realized is the ethics are unethical. The American Psychological Association. And one of the ways they're unethical is that they are completely based on the myth of objectivity. Completely. The myth of objectivity. That it's possible. And that the way to control, they're also based on control, is through control and punishment. And so they give no help to their members who don't know how to deal with the intimacy of the therapeutic relationship. Because their belief in the way you deal with that is through objectivity and through control and through the threat of punishment. And it will never work. And it doesn't. That's why so many therapists sleep with their clients and all this other stuff, I think. Now, so it was a privilege. Not one I enjoyed at the time. But what we have is a system that's based on the knowledgeable person who is objective and removed, manipulating the variables so that the client gets better. Do you see that model? It's the same model as we use with rats. It doesn't work with rats. It doesn't work with people. That's the model we're coming out of. And so what happens is that people improve some, because I mean just talking and getting stuff out and you know, but at a mega level they are kept in the addictive system. Now, when people begin recovery, most of their time is spent in their addictive process. That what is normal in this society is the addictive process. So that's where most of us are until we really start recovery of some kind. Then that decreases over time. Many people don't even know they have a living process. And many people die never knowing they are. I wouldn't say have. They are a living process. But what happens over time is we spend more and more time in our living process and less time in our addictive process. Now, I think this never crosses the line. I think it's asymptotic to the axis. That's what we used to say in math. Good? You like that? I like that too. Because we live in an addictive society. Because everything around us is going to invite us back into the disease. I used to wonder why it was so difficult to do recovery, and then I thought, you know, I can go to check in at the airport, and between the time I get out of the car and the time I get on the plane, I've had 15 invitations into my disease. You know, it's no wonder that it keeps cropping up, and I need to keep being in recovery, because everything around me invites me into it. That's my reality. Some people get so... There's a woman yesterday who was just insistent that you got recovered. And I said, well, I don't know. I've been at it a while, and I sure know that I can flip back in it at a moment's notice. And I think it has to do with the fact that partly that the society really supports and is an addictive society. Now, in our living process, we have only, I don't know how to put this, we have only like the teeniest awareness, I think, of that in this culture. Just, it's so teeny, you know. Now, I equate my living process, my spirituality, and my sobriety. To me, they're the same thing. It's no difference. When I am sober, I am living my process. And when I am living my process, I am my spirituality. Now, I believe that my process is God, whatever we call God. God is more than my process. But when I am living my process, I am back into, whatever you want to call it, nirvana, oneness, whatever words you want to use, I'm back into that. And I can live out of that a lot of the time if I do my work. And I need to continue to do my work. We do quite a bit of organizational consulting about the addictive organization with organizations that want to get healthy. Well, what happened with this chart? One of the things that Diane, she does more work with organizations than I do because I get kind of bored with organizations, and she runs into a lot of organizational transformation people who want to help organizations transform. You know, there's a lot of transformation stuff now. And what Diane said, and I think this is really profound, is she said, there is no transformation without recovery. Okay? Now, I think therapy, many spiritual paths, religion, have tried to bring about transformation frequently, if not always, while actively participating in the addictive process. So it hasn't worked and won't work. As long as we use a model of psychotherapy that comes out of the addictive process, no matter how understanding, skillful, good, insightful we are, it's not going to work. People may get a little better, but at a mega level, they are going to perpetuate the addictive process. As long as we focus on transformation without seeing that recovery has to happen because we are all in this addictive disease, we're not going to get there. And you can meditate forever. I recently was at a Buddhist center, and I had a group that I'm working with for a year. They're all people who've trained with me for at least a year and are doing what we call an advanced year of spirituality training. I can never say it with a straight face. We started out calling it a year of advanced. Linda did this, didn't you? We started out calling it a year of advanced spirituality training. And by the first or second session, you know, we were on this title. It's like, and so they were saying to me, well, what's advanced spirituality? And I said, I don't know. You know, so we decided we would take the advanced out. And then they said, well, what's spirituality training? And so I said, well, I don't know. And so we took training out. And then we had a year of spirituality. And then by the middle of the year, we all decided we had no idea what spirituality was. So we called it the year for the rest of the year. And it was a great year. I mean, so I'm doing another the year. And one of the things I like to do is this Tassajara. I like to take the group to Tassajara, and they're very kind to me and letting me, they've known me for years, and so they let me bring a group there, which they usually don't do. Tassajara is a Zen monastery in California, and it has hot springs. I love hot springs. And so anyway, we were there this past summer, and there were 20 of us there for 5 days or a week. Anyway, it was really, we were just having a wonderful time, and we'd meet once a day in the yurt and do our thing, and we were, you know, there were other guests there, and there were the students there, and then one of the, actually the president and one of the board members came and said, we want to meet with you. And of course, being an addict, I immediately thought, oh God, what have we done? You know, are we in trouble? And what they said was, we've been watching you. And they said, we have never seen a group of people as clear and as straightforward and as centered as this group. How are you doing it? We want to do it. And I was really honored, really, really honored, and hadn't realized how I was exposing myself by bringing people there who've trained with me. I never thought of that. But the thing that is as we talked, is they said, we have people sitting zazen and, but they're not dealing within their psychological, their family issues, their addiction issues, and we don't have community the way you guys do. You seem to have community. Well, we don't talk about community at all. We don't try to build community. We don't talk about love. We don't talk about unconditional. We don't talk. We do our work. And what comes out of that is community. But we don't try to do that. We face our addictive process and we learn to live in process. Now, conversely, it's not possible to recover unless you're willing to transform. And this is where I think some people get stuck in the 12-step program, and I've heard some complaints about that this week, but I still think the program works. It's the people who get stuck. But what happens is if you really work that program, and I think the 12-step program, as far as I've seen, is the best tool for recovery. If you really work that program, you are going to make a system shift. You are going to make a paradigm shift. You have to. You put on different glasses. One day I got up, I went to bed, and I was in a non-participatory, scientific, objective, observer place. And the next day I got up and I put on my glasses, and I'm in a participatory worldview, and I've never been able to get out of it since. And I love it. Something's going to happen. You're going to have to be willing to go wherever that transformation takes you. Now, the program says you have to put your sobriety first. That means that I have to be willing to let go of anything in my life if it threatens my sobriety. Now, the paradox of that is I'm willing to let it go. I may not have to. But if I say I'm willing to let it go so I don't have to, I'm in deep shit. Because we'll try to manipulate anything. But if I'm willing, and I recently had a deep process. It was a very profound deep process for me. It was at the beginning of the year in the group, and we were up at the hot springs in Montana. And I got up one day and I just was feeling sad. I haven't said much to this group about deep process, but just that's part of the kind of work I do. And I was just feeling sad. And I just stayed with it during the day, and it didn't seem to come up with much force. It was just a kind of underlying sadness. And then just before dinner, I went up to my room there at the old hotel in Montana, and I looked out over the meadow. It's such a beautiful meadow, and I thought, what is this sadness? I'm feeling so sad. And immediately what I heard in my head was, well, you're letting go of so much. And so I stood there and thought, I am? What am I letting go? And I thought, well, see, I'm letting go of my publisher. Actually, I'm kicking him out. I'm letting go of my editor. That doesn't feel like a big deal. I'm planning to sell my house and move up to Montana. That doesn't, there's some sadness. I love the house, but I'm ready to go. And then you're letting go of your son. Well, see, I'm always letting go of my son. He's the favorite object of my disease. So that's a constant thing. And I thought, none of this seems real big to me. Why am I so sad? And I thought, well, don't know. I just and so I thought, well, I'll go to dinner. It's dinner time. And I went down to dinner, and I sat across from my sponsor. Dual relationship. She's in the training. She's my sponsor. She's my friend. I'm her sponsor on some things. It's a terrible thing. I could be put in jail any minute. And she looked at me and she said, "Are you all right?" And I burst into tears. And I went and lay down on the mats. They just happened to be around the corner since we were all doing our deep process work. And she sat with me. And I cried and cried and cried like my heart would break. And nothing, no pictures, no ideas, nothing, just the tears. And then, somewhere in that crying, I heard this, like a voice in my head. I know it's not psychotic, it's just my head voice here. And I've never had this before in a deep process, but it said, "This is a process test." And I started laughing. I could not quit laughing. I mean, I just cracked up, and I was rolling all over the mattress, and she couldn't contain herself. She didn't know what I was laughing about. She just joined me, and the two of us were just laughing uproariously. And then the people in the dining room heard us, and they all started joining. We were all laughing because I was just giggling and giggling and giggling. And then what I got was, "Are you willing to let go, even when you don't know what you're letting go of?" And the answer was yes, just like that. Just, yes I am. And that was it. Felt fine. Sadness was gone. I still don't know what it is I'm letting go of right now. I know I'm in a big transition phase for me. Living in process, for me, means living a life of faith. Living in process means always leaping into the void and starting another leap before my foot touches down. Living in process, for me, means flying by the seat of my pants and just assuming there's some celestial skyhook up there somewhere. But it means being present. To me, one of the exciting things, I did an article for John Denver's Windstar Journal. And the one line, usually when I write things, it's like there's one line I really like in the whole thing. And the line I liked in there was, "Are we ready to face the possibility that we're being led into the new paradigm by a bunch of recovering drunks and drug addicts?" And I think that's what's happening. And I think that what's happening is that, I believe if I had said some of this stuff 5 years ago to a group of psychotherapists, I'd have been drawn and quartered, And what I know is, that people who go into psychotherapy are not just wounded healers and are not just codependents. People who go into this field want to do something. And I know that there are no group of people in the world that go to more workshops than psychotherapists. I mean, you name a new technique, you name a new approach, we'll be there, we'll learn it, And I believe it's because down deep we know that whatever we're doing isn't working. That it helps some, but it's not really working. And we want it to work. So I believe that we're going to be able to make this transition into something that really works. And it's going to take time. And I'm just raising consciousness about it. That's all I'm doing. I hate to do this, but I'm going to have to go catch this plane. Thank you all very much for coming.
This concludes Recovery in an Addictive World with Wilson Schaef.